All right, let's go to our guest line as we kick off hour number 2 now, and we're going to hone in on the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, talk more about the opponent with Chris Mooneyham, studio host, sideline reporter for Georgia Tech football. Chris, thanks so much for coming on. How are you today?
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Good to be with you. How are you?
We're doing great. We're doing great. So, we keep talking about Georgia Tech being one of the surprise teams here in the early going, the way that they beat Florida State over in Ireland and then obviously took care of business against Georgia State. Do you look at them as a surprise team, or was this kind of expected, maybe, quietly, down there in Georgia, that this team might be pretty good this year?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent it's expected. I suppose the expectations, it kind of depends on what you expected this team to be. Did you expect them to be a 6-6 team again? Or was it possible they could pull off a couple of upsets and get to 8 wins? There was a lot of optimism, and I mean a ton of optimism going into this season. For some, guarded optimism for good reason. Still a team that's trying to figure themselves out in some ways, especially defensively with a brand new coordinator on that side. But there were a host of teams that, folks in our industry and fans, folks around the program here in Atlanta that said to themselves, you know what, we're getting Florida State exactly at the right time. And if you're going to pull off this win, this is the time to do it.
So take us through that game if you could. I mean, we watched the game, but what allowed Georgia Tech to have such success running the football? I think that's what surprised everyone. I know Georgia Tech likes to run the football, but everybody was talking about Florida State having one of the best defensive lines in the country, and Georgia Tech really controlled the line of scrimmage. Did that part of it surprise you, the way that they had so much success on the ground?
Yeah, certainly so. Having said that, look, this offensive line has really probably been the biggest, in some ways, turnaround for Georgia Tech. Sort of led the charge into becoming a competitive team again. The Jackets have only allowed 15 sacks in the last 15 ball games. Just 15 sacks last year. Have not given up one so far this year. And keep in mind, they led the ACC in rushing last year. They were top 20 or top 15 in every major rushing category nationally. They had 5 guys back this year who either started or saw significant snaps. I think the biggest surprise for me was the performance of the Georgia Tech defensive line. I'm sure you've heard that answer a few times, and you guys feel the same. I stole a number from College Football Film Room off of Twitter, an amazing number that I have to share with you. The Georgia Tech defense contacted Florida State's running backs at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage 50% of their carries. I know that's an astronomical number that I almost couldn't believe. I went back and watched some of the ball game and sort of charted it. I'll admit to you, I didn't do the entire ball game because by the time I got to the third quarter, I got lazy. Versus the passing game and DJU, the Jackets generated a 38% pressure rate. That's exactly what we all know that you need to do against Uiagalelei to have success against Florida State. It helped that they were trying to figure themselves out as well, that they had big questions offensively. But paired with the offensive line, their aggression, their belief, Jeet Wade, the offensive line coach, of course, Brent Key. Then you're controlling on the defensive line as well. And we all know what are the 2 biggest things that we've talked about the last 10 years in college football. 1, the lifeblood is recruiting. 2, you've got to win the trenches.
Yeah, and Georgia Tech has certainly done that, and that's been a hot topic up here this week about whether or not Syracuse can be more physical and compete with this Georgia Tech team on Saturday. I do want to ask you about Jamal Haynes, the running back, was a wide receiver, right, and made the switch in the fall camp of 2023. And I guess, bring us up to date with his game, his skill set. What allows him to be such a dynamic running back for this offense?
He's a bit of a diminutive guy, except when you see him, he has legs like tree trunks. But you'd expect that. You guys know ball, and so, when you see a guy of his stature, you imagine for him to run with a great combination of speed and power. When you're walking up to the kid on the sidelines, if you guys are at the game on Saturday, you're going to say, okay, when I see Jamal Haynes, I can't wait to see the size of his thighs. They're like, he's a really thick kid to be as short of stature as he is. He's incredibly tough. He's a sharp kid. He was all about making the change to running back He played big boy football here in the state of Georgia. I cover a little bit of high school football and recruiting here in the state as well. He played at a school named Grayson, which is a nationally ranked high school football program that wins state championships and has contended for national championships. So he was used to that level of exposure, moving around the football field, trying new things, and just wanted to show his wares and have an opportunity to play regularly. And so he was all gung-ho about making the move, and he's not quite like we say in the South that some of these diminutive running backs are kind of like water bugs running around back there in the backfield, and they're hard to catch. He's not quite that, only because he has such a low center of gravity and great power.
And how about his quarterback in Haynes King? And I mean, this is something that we're seeing up here with Kyle McCord, a guy who comes in, who transfers in, and immediately, has legitimacy when it comes to that offense, right? He's a veteran guy. In the case of McCord, King obviously has played a lot of football, right? He started at Texas A&M. He's been at Georgia Tech now. This is his second year. He's a 23-year-old young man. How much does he, matter to this offense? And it seems like he really makes that offense go.
Guys, I don't know if you remember, but he got a raw deal at Texas A&M. He actually sort of won that job twice at Texas A&M and then had the job taken out from underneath him. Certainly one time there was some controversy as to whether or not they just sort of lifted him out of the post the second time, I think it was. But let me give you a statistic, and you may have relayed this to your audience, so I may be running through a number once again, but I think this gives you a good idea of where this guy is. Only two FBS quarterbacks at the Power 4 level, Power 5 last year, of course, only two FBS quarterbacks all of last year had 2,700 passing yards to go along with 600 rushing yards, 25 or more touchdown passes, and 5 or more rushing yards. Just really quick again, 2,700 passing yards, 600 rushing yards, and then 25 passing touchdowns with 5 rushing touchdowns. Only two dudes. One was Haynes King. The other guy won a Heisman Trophy. And let me tell you, this is the dude you guys would love. I mean, honest to God, he's such a great kid. He's humble. He's quiet. But once you coax him during an interview and he sort of relaxes with you, he'll tell you the truth. He'll lay it on the line. He'll take blame. He'll tell you when they've got to be better. He's a great conductor of the offense. His numbers sort of sneak up on you to that point from last year. He may not have the same sort of numbers this year, but he may actually have a bit of a better season, if you follow my meaning, because they don't necessarily want him to throw for 2,700 yards in 2024.
All right, so let's, I guess, talk about this matchup on Saturday now. And give me your observations, your impressions, your assessment of Syracuse. I know it was just one game, and it was just against Ohio. It's not an ACC team or a Power 4 team, but I'm sure you had a chance to watch the game. New coaching staff with Fran Brown, new quarterback with Kyle McCord. What stands out to you about the Orange?
First of all, I have a sneaking suspicion that you guys may be where Georgia Tech was sort of starting to feel out last year. Or maybe you've taken that big step and Georgia Tech and Syracuse could be sort of even this year. I'm a massive fan of Fran Brown. The flagship for Georgia Tech here that I work for, we're the ESPN affiliate here in Atlanta as well, and we're the flagship for Georgia Tech athletics. But, we've kind of got this funny thing going here. We're also the official sports talk home of the Georgia Bulldogs. So I'm familiar with Brown. I've covered him, of course, and as a guy who also will cover recruiting, obviously there are many people who are very fond of his recruiting prowess and his history. So I think, first of all, the hire of Brown is top shelf. It's absolutely top shelf, guys. And I heard your interview as well. That's when I tuned in to listen. Man, he's no nonsense, right? He can be pretty dry, and he'll just lay it out there for you and be very honest. That's the kind of guy he is. And I'll tell you, that's really attractive to recruits because they know that they can trust in what he's saying and that he's believable. So I think on that front moving forward, you guys are in good hands. Now, one thing he's going to have to do is lead on his assistant, Elijah Robinson, to get that defensive line sorted out and get in some big-time recruits. Same thing on the offensive line. Giving up the 255 on the ground to Ohio, obviously not a great sign. It is the opener, so that measurable is what it is, because we know Georgia Tech is certainly going to try to run the football against Syracuse and play physical, as Brent Key said a little earlier today and yesterday and probably the day before that.
Yeah, and if you heard the interview, you heard Fran Brown didn't seem all too pleased with the comments about physicality, and that might just be a case of him challenging his team because he felt like they weren't physical enough against Ohio, and that led to the 255 yards on the ground, that they need to be more physical, they need to tackle better. So it might be a message to his team, but it seems like I'm going to ask you about the keys to keys to the game on Saturday. Does it start up front? It seems like it does.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Every game Georgia Tech is going to play. I mean, to be honest with you, I'll be searching in the back half of the season to find new ways to break down ball games when I have these interviews when it comes to Georgia Tech, because that's really all it's about. And that's not a big surprise. I mean, it's such a key in the Tyler Santucci defense as well. For those in your listening audience that don't realize, he's the first-year defensive coordinator from Georgia Tech. He comes over from Duke. Before that, he was at Texas A&M. And, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that Duke had, in many ways, the ACC's top-ranked defense last year, which is really remarkable. I still almost can't believe it when I read it. They had the top-ranked scoring defense. 16th nationally, I think, was the overall national ranking. Don't hold me to that. The top 50 rushing defense. So, again, Tech is really concentrating on the offensive line and the defensive line. Syracuse will certainly be sore. The Orange, your guys are going to be sore coming up next week. And that's okay, because that's going to get them ready for the type of teams that they'll face moving forward. I know a lot of people think this is going to be a bit of a high-scoring affair. I got to be honest with you. I'm sort of on the opposite end of the ledger. I think first team to 24 wins the ball game.
Wow. Okay. We were talking a little bit about Georgia Tech's schedule earlier. We know this is an enormous game for Syracuse. It feels like it could be a swing game to SU season. When you look at Georgia Tech's schedule and how difficult it is there added I know they're all important, Chris, but is this one maybe have a little added importance, knowing what lies ahead with Louisville and Miami down the road and Georgia? And I mean, they've got a tough schedule this year.
Yeah, 100%. There's no doubt about it. I don't know that the Georgia Tech schedule is difficult in that all but one team on their schedule played in a bowl game last year. For those of you that don't follow Georgia Tech out there in your listening audience, of course, they have only one team on their schedule which did not play in a bowl game last year, that being the Virginia Military Institute, whom they will have next, by the way. But, I think if Georgia Tech could get to 4-0 and then meet Louisville in the Bluegrass State, I think that, maybe that's the ACC game of the week, or I don't know what the rest of the schedule looks like, but I know it'll be a big ball game if you have those two teams in the top 25, and perhaps both of them are undefeated. I don't know Louisville's schedule, to be honest with you, in the interim. But just in the sense of taking these steps, being ranked really not a big deal to Brent Key and his crew. It's really not. And they talked about how they expected this. But at the same time, they're just trying to take it day by day and week by week. And a lot of that's cliche. But, I mean, we found in this modern era that sometimes the kids need these cliches even more than they ever have, because it helps keep them focused. For Syracuse, when you look at their schedule moving forward, I heard you guys having a conversation about if they beat Georgia Tech, when then could they potentially be ranked down the road? I think you get this win if you're the Orange, and people around the ACC for sure, and then, part of America will say, hey, wait a minute now. We believe Georgia Tech's pretty good, and Syracuse just handled them and just got that win. That's really, really interesting, and will then, I think, go to sort of prove a point that I've been making, where I think the middle of the ACC is a little bit better than some other folks do. I think the middle of the ACC is up just a tad bit, and the top teams in the ACC are down just a little bit. So I think that'll prove that the ACC sort of compacted, and then you guys will have yourself a big ball game coming up in 3 weeks with UNLV.
Yeah, and to answer your question about Louisville, I looked up Louisville's schedule as you were talking there. They beat Austin Peay 62-0. They play Jacksonville State this week, and then they are off until the Georgia Tech game. They've got a bye week, so they will certainly be undefeated. And if Georgia Tech's undefeated, I think you're right. That could be very well the game of the week in the ACC conference. Chris, we really appreciate the time. Great insight. Thanks so much for the time, and enjoy your time in the 315.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me.
All right, Chris Mooneyham, studio host and sideline reporter for Georgia Tech football. It'll be a 12 o'clock kick Saturday inside the Dome.